Welcome to the Gaming Bench. Today I'm going to make the most popular game to ever have existed in history. Dice. And to keep it interesting, I'm going to make two different kinds. One set made out of wood and one set made out of ivory. All right, let's get to it. I'm going to start with the wooden dice. And this is a pretty straightforward project if you have a table saw. But even if you don't have a table saw, I wouldn't sweat it too much. If you want to cut all this by hand, it may not be as accurate and precise as a table saw can give you, but here's the thing. Ancient gamblers and ancient dice makers for that region didn't really have an expectation that their dice would be precise or perfectly weighted, right? That a lot of dice throws were governed by fortune, not by math or by the skill of the thrower. So if your dice are a little wonky, that is perfectly acceptable and probably closer to what these dice would really be than what I'm going to produce by using power tools. So I have some walnut and some maple here. So I'm going to make some dice that are white with black pips and some black dice with white pips, just because I thought that would be fun. So I've already cut these two sticks to 3/4 of an inch square. And then I have a couple small sticks that I'm going to use my doweling jig and round off and make the pips. I'll inlay the pips for these wooden dice. Now, these dice are going to be pretty big, even by modern standards. So this is a test piece I did. So this is a 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch cube. And you can see compared to a modern die, it's a good amount larger. But I wanted to make some big chunky dice. Not only will it be easier for me to do the inlay in the holes, it'll just be nice to have a big chunk of dice to throw. So as far as how I'm going to make these, I recently made some long dice. And if you saw that video, it's going to be the exact same process. I'm going to drill some holes with my drill press, use a doweling jig to make some inlay, stick it in there, glue it up, and obviously, unlike the long dice, which are long, I will cut these up into cubes, or they'll be cut up into cubes. And that's it. Then I'll do a little sanding to break the edges and finish it with something. To start, I drew a line the whole way around this stalk, indicating where I'm going to cut it off. And I'm just going to draw the pips in by hand. Now, modern dice, the convention is that the opposite sides equal 7. So 6 on one side, it's going to be 1 on the opposite side. 5 on one side, it's going to be 2 on the opposite side. And this convention goes back a surprisingly long time, but not always. There's plenty of Roman dice, for example, that the orientation of the pips is kind of random. I don't know if it really has anything to do with the probability, but I don't think so. But I'm gonna mimic the modern convention. And obviously I can only do 4 sides until or I can only drill 4 sides until I cut it off this. So in drilling these holes, I think if I wanted to really make them as balanced as I could, I would have to drill like the 6 pips shallow and then the 1 pip deeper so that when I put the inlay in there, the weight balances out. But I'm not going to do any of that because, again, I'm not too concerned about these things being perfectly balanced. So I have a 1/8 inch drill bit in here. I bought this drill press from Harbor Freight, and the depth gauge immediately broke off, so I have a little tape flag on here to show how deep I'm going to drill. Well, that's not right. I screwed that up. Got these pips marked off incorrectly. You know what? I'm just gonna roll with it. struck a line right here to show where to line up the piece to cut it at. Yeah, and it wants to fly away because it's such a small piece. Now I can drill the last two sides of the cube. All right, now I'm going to use my doweling jig to make the pips, and you just need a thin piece of wood, and I'm going to chuck it up into my drill and jam it through this hole that has a cutting edge to make this into a dowel. I think this is going to be a pain because these pieces are so thin, they're going to want to break. So first you need to bring the piece to a point so it'll start in the hole and hope for the best. Okay. No problems. Yeah. That is what I expected. I gotta cut thinner pieces to start. Much better. Each step in this process has gotten progressively more fiddly, and this is probably the most fiddly part, where I need to glue in all the pips. And of course, they're not going to just slide in easily. I'm going to need to convince them. Okay, there seems to be a part in every project where I hate everything and it looks like trash. And that's where we are right now, that this looks terrible. But I'm optimistic because when I made these long dice, I was also at this point, and they turned out pretty good. And done with this part. And that really sucked. All these little pips were so fiddly. It took me forever to cut all these pieces, to mill them all down to dowels, and to glue them in there. Ugh, it was a mistake to use inlay for this. You think I would have learned after doing the long dice. So these have been drying for a couple hours. I just want to cut off most of the excess wood. After some trial and error, what seems to work best is I knock down the points, most of the points with the palm sander, and then I just have a piece of 80 grit stapled to this piece of plywood. And if I scrape against it in one direction, It helps me keep the sides pretty flat. The first piece I did, I kind of went back and forth, and the corners got really rounded and wonky. All right, next I'm going to just continue sanding these with higher and higher grit up to, I think, like 220, and then I'll put some finish on them. And here are the finished wooden dice. Put a couple coats of spray polyurethane on them, and they turned out really good. I mean, they're far from perfect, or precise, I should say, but they're satisfying to roll, and I did a bunch of test rolls, and they seem reasonably random. All right, on to the next set. All right, with the wood dice done, let's get started on the ivory dice. Now, not real ivory, of course, because ivory's been illegal for at least 40 years. But I'm gonna use what's sometimes called vegetable ivory. I bought a bunch of these. These are tagua nuts. And they're just a super hard nut, and when you cut into it, it has a really bright white, super hard material on the inside that kind of looks like ivory. The challenge with these guys is that when you cut them in half, there's a void on the inside, and you don't know how big the void is until you cut it in half. That just means that the workable area I'm gonna have is probably pretty small. Ugh. Well, it cracked right at the void, but still, there's some meat right here that I might be able to get a cube out of. That is getting close to cube shaped. Okay, so now this is cube shaped in the roughest idea of the word. It's a hint of a cube. And, you know, I wanted to do this with all hand tools, but I think it's time to bring in the power tools. Here's my plan. I have this grinding disc on my table saw, and unfortunately I need a 10-inch sanding disc, and I could only find 6 inches. So this is obviously too small for this wheel, but I'm gonna work with what I have. I have some 10-inch on order. They should arrive in like 3 or 4 days. And I'm gonna just grind it away until I start to get to the void. And so I can either avoid the void or work around it somehow and end up with a square. And we'll just have to cut into this nut to see how big the void is and how big of a die I can make. So I stopped here. This is a pretty good cube. I got lucky. I've mostly contained the void on the inside. I'm afraid if I go any further, you can start to see the void poking out there and there. And if I go much further, it's pretty bad there. But this is pretty big, probably bigger than I want. Yeah, I'm gonna grind it down just a little bit more, see what happens. I gotta say, that did not go at all like I expected. I thought I would have to cut all my dies into tiny little cubes and work around the voids in the nuts. But for most of these, I was able to essentially encase the void inside the square. So I got about 1 die out of a nut. And in comparison, that's a lot of waste, right? There's a lot of nut that I had to grind away to get a cube. But these cubes are really bigger than I had anticipated. You can still see kind of that I got close to the voids in some cases, and they just started to peek out, and that's when I stopped. I actually would have liked these dice to be a little smaller, but I was afraid if I ground any further down that then I would get something like this, where there's a bunch of raggedy void showing. And I did have this one weird piece that has some weird discoloration on the inside instead of a void. But what I'm going to do is, my intention was to make these look like vintage ivory dice, so old dice. So some cracks and some holes. I don't think that's a bad thing. I'm actually going to draw or scrape some striations into them to try to give them that vintage ivory scrimshaw look. And we'll see how that goes. Now, of course, I still have to drill holes in all of these for the pips, and that might go all wrong, right? As soon as I start drilling into it, this may crack and fall apart. I don't know. That worked out really well. None of the pieces exploded as I was drilling them, which was my concern. And oh, I missed a side. The pieces aren't necessarily that precise, but they look pretty good. So I'm gonna fill in the pips. Now, I'm not gonna do inlay because I may never do that again. But I have read that medieval dice where sometimes the pips were filled in with a combination of beeswax and soot. So I'm going to give that a try. But first, I need to make some soot. Did some reading, and it seems one easy way to produce soot is to burn turpentine. So I had an old bottle of turpentine that was in the garage when we bought the house. So I made a little bowl out of tinfoil and then covered a metal colander with tinfoil and put it over it and lit it on fire. Now, admittedly, things got a little out of control for a second, and it was a little concerning, but the fire burned down in a couple minutes and thankfully didn't catch my driveway on fire. After it cooled down, I just picked up the colander and I had the inside full of soot. This next part I anticipate being a god-awful mess, so I have all my PPP on. So here is all the tin foil that I had over that colander, and I'm hoping I can just scrape this soot off. That doesn't seem like a lot. I melted some beeswax in a Doppler boiler on the stove, and it is already starting to cool down and harden up. So I want to let it get to about the consistency of putty. Then I want to mix it in with the soot. Never done this before, but I have worked with beeswax before, and it seems like it would work. Definitely darker than it was. I was hoping for more of a pitch black, and this is kind of a dark charcoal gray. I'm going to try it. So here's what I'm going to do. I have all my dice, and I'm just going to pack this wax into the holes. Yeah, so it's pretty cold in my basement, so this wax has set up really fast. Just gonna scrape off the extra. So that mostly worked. It filled in all the pips. I had hoped the wax would seep into all the little cracks and striations I cut into this thing too and give it kind of an aged look, and it kind of did. So for this next one, this is the one that had the weird discoloration in the nut, so that's why it definitely looks weird. For this next one, I'm going to heat up the wax again on the double boiler, and I'm going to try to pour it in when it's a little more molten. See if that makes my life a little easier. All right, this wax is still molten, and I got to move fast before it starts to set up again. I have the little heater going to heat up the dye, so I'm not pouring hot wax directly into a cold receptacle. Oof, that's already setting up so fast. I'm just mashing the wax into the holes, all the holes. All right, that was definitely easier than the first go. It's pretty good. I'm gonna try something different for this one. I have this leather gel stain, which I've used in previous projects, and I'm just gonna slather it all over this thing and see what happens. Down to one rubber glove, so this could be a mess. Wow, I really like the way that looks. All the little striations show up because the gel stain gets down in the cracks in the way the wax couldn't. I'm curious how this stain will dry inside the pips, because right now it looks really good. Norman. And here's these dice done. These are the ones that I filled the pips with the wax. I think they look pretty good, but I'm especially happy with the way these turns out. These are the ones that I used that gel stain on, and the gel filled up all the pips nicely and also sunk into all the little cracks and striations. And I think it really sells the idea of it being vintage ivory. Pretty cool. And that's it. This project was a lot of fun, even though, if I'm being honest, filling all the pips in the wooden dice with those inlays nearly broke me. But I'm happy with how they turned out. So this is the kind of content you like. I put out new videos every week. One on the rules, history, and strategy of an ancient game, and one on how to make it yourself. So I hope you'll like and subscribe, and I will see you next time on The Gaming Bay.